Welcome to Connecting the Community podcast. I am your host, Marge Andre. I will be connecting you to people, organizations, and events that create community. I am creating this podcast in Richmond Hill, an eclectic and very culturally diverse community with lots of trees and streams and interesting people, just up the hill from Toronto. On this podcast, I am talking with Leah Taylor Roy, the MP for the riding of Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill. We're going to talk about three things: the choosing of the next leader of the federal Liberal Party, what currently is happening in Ottawa, and I'd like to touch upon the issues of dealing with the newly elected president of our southern border. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you, Marge. It's great to be talking to you again. And so much has been happening since we last spoke. So I think it's timely.
Yeah, definitely. It's so much is happening. But Leah, I am not certain everybody knows all about you. I fortunately have had many opportunities to talk to you, but please give us some of your background. Set the stage.
Sure. I'm just I guess I hate to use the word patriot because it sounds a lot like south of the border, but let me say I'm a dedicated Canadian. I'm someone who believes in that we have one of the best countries on this earth. Um, and I say that with some hesitancy because I hate to cause any divisions or say we're better than you. That's not my point. My point is simply to say that we should be very proud of our country. And so I'm actually, I got involved in politics and I decided to run because I saw what was happening globally, and I really felt like I needed to do everything I could to keep Canada Canada and to preserve our values and to make sure that I did my part if I could, if people wanted me to stand up for our community and for our country. So I'm a normal person, with a background, a mixed background like everybody else, lots of kids, elderly parents, business career, and just decided that it was time for me to throw my hat in the ring and to try and add something to the conversation and the civility, Marge.
Yeah.
I mean, I really feel right now that we need collaboration. We need people to come back to the center and to where we can talk about issues, even though we have different opinions, and really move forward to protect Canada
Yeah.
and our way of life, our future as a country, as a planet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just, and my most important thing is actually being a representative for our communities in Aurora, Oak Ridges, and Richmond Hill. It's
Okay.
the basis of democracy.
Very good. Thank you for that. So let's first talk about the election of the federal Liberal leader.
Mm.
Is it final that there are just three candidates, Chrystia Freeland, Karina Gold, and Mark Carney? Those
No,
are the only names on the ballot?
no, not as of right now. The other people are still there. Jaime Batiste has dropped out and put his support behind Mark Carney, but there's still Ruby Dalla is
Mm,
in there, and Chandra Arya was not allowed to run for various reasons, mostly I think to do with his perspective on bilingualism, which of course is a major tenet of the party. But we also have Frank Baylis, who is a former member of Parliament from Montreal. We still have, I think, five right now. The three front runners are the ones you mentioned, and those are the
yeah.
ones most referred to.
So the election date, or the date that you vote, is March the 9th.
Correct.
And I know there's been some wanting new members to sign up.
Mhm.
Is there scrutiny for the new members to be signed up? Do you know if there were very many, or what happens there?
Yeah, there were quite a few new members. I don't know the total across the country, March, but in our riding, there was over 700 new members. The cutoff date was the 27th of January. And so any new Liberal member that is signed up by that time, but just because you fill out the form and your name goes in doesn't mean you are going to be able to vote. There is a vetting process. I mean, there was a lot of stuff on, the internet, like I signed up my dog or I did this and that. And I'm like, great, but we do check things. So there will be no dogs voting. But that is a process that the party will go through. Although sometimes I think dogs might be better than some people. Anyway, that's a whole different
Yeah.
matter.
Okay.
But no, there will be a process to vet people. I mean, of course, there's still, if people want to deceive, to be dishonest, to do things. You can't catch everyone, Marge, but we're doing our best to vet and to make sure people who have signed up actually meet the criteria that we have set out. It would be a lot easier if the Conservatives and other parties publish their party lists, because then we'd be able to know if people are actually signing up for more than one party.
Hmm.
Because one criteria is that you only are a member of one party. We cannot do that, unfortunately, but we can check on other things.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, okay, so you got all these people from all over voting. Is it the case that each vote is like one vote and there's not waiting for provinces, or is that the case?
No, every vote is one vote and there's ranked ballots. But then what happens is within a electoral district, so I represented Royal Bridges, Richmond Hill, which is one electoral district. There were 338. There are now 343 because we've created new ones as our population has expanded and shifted. So, within a riding, every person's vote counts as one, but then a riding is weighted. So every riding has 100 kind of votes, and where it goes depends on how individuals vote. So we do try and ensure that large urban areas, for example, don't dominate, or that areas where there's more liberal members dominate over ones where there's fewer liberal members. We want to make sure that liberals from coast to coast to coast have a voice and are represented. So it's important that we do that. And so, yes, every riding is weighted equally, but within the riding, every liberal has equal weight. So myself as a member of parliament, it doesn't matter that I'm a member of parliament. I'm one vote, just like everyone else here. And how we as a riding come out will then go into the total, but it will be weighted.
Thank you for explaining that because I've learned lots. I didn't quite understand what the process was. So, uh, on March 9th, people are going to be voting. Everyone doesn't need to go to Ottawa. It's online, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
It's online.
And with the ranked ballot, will it happen like all like there's voting and they're tallied and then a winner will be announced, or can it be back and forth for a bit? Will we know on March 9th?
That's a good question. I think you will know on March 9th, March, but I hate to say certainly because you never know how things play out, but we should know. We should know that day who the next leader and therefore the next prime minister is on March 9th. And I think that's important. There's one other thing I wanted to mention about our membership and our leadership race, which is that the Liberal Party decided, I think it was in 2015, not to charge for membership. Now, that is different than the Conservatives who still charge for membership. And was controversial in the party because the Conservatives use it to raise a lot of money. But we felt, democracy, everybody should be able to have a role, be able to voice their opinion, regardless of whether they could pay or not. So I think that's important. And I guess to a certain extent, perhaps we open it up to more people doing that. But I think that's what we want to do. We want to have more people involved. And
Mhm.
if we trust that people are doing it for the right reasons.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Okay, I think you've said this, but what is the winner called? Is it the prime minister in waiting, or is there a qualification for who wins on March 9th?
Well, on March 9th, they would become the leader of the party. And technically, there's no role of prime minister in our constitution. This is
Okay.
all based on precedent, right? So, but the new leader would need to form a new government, a new cabinet, and then be sworn in. So there will be a period, a very short period, where we're between where there's one prime minister and another leader, which is kind of odd. But that should happen fairly quickly, Marge. And I also want to say on this front, because a lot of people have been saying, the party's irresponsible in what they're doing and that we don't have a voice right now or in Ottawa, especially versus the United States, which I know you want to talk about later. But I would say that's not the case. We still have a prime minister, we still have a government, and they're working very hard to ensure that we have the best outcome we can get, given that we have a rather, I'd say, unpredictable government south of us. And so we do have continuity. And I actually think that having our current prime minister and most of the cabinet in place, these are people who have been in office for 9 years. These are people who have experience not only in government, but also in negotiations with the United States as well as other trade deals. And I think we're very fortunate to have them there dealing with the situation right now. And I believe there will be a smooth transition March 9th. But by that time, we should also know a little bit about what the United States is actually doing. And we have done the work. We've done everything we can to ensure that we are in the best possible position versus what the new administration in the United States wants.
Okay. Thank you for saying that. That clears up some things. Now, if Mark Carney gets in, he is not currently an elected official, unlike the other ones. So are there restrictions for him? Does he have an office, staff? What happens?
Yeah, he can be leader of the party and prime minister, but it's again the prime minister, the leader of the party, typically has a seat, and to speak in the House you need to. So it's very interesting. I believe that he will run. He will get a seat, but once again he can technically there can be cabinet ministers that aren't elected too. I mean, it is allowed because there's a difference between the government, the Privy Council, and elected MPs. Again, precedent, what we've always had, tradition is that all cabinet ministers, there's some exceptions in history, but cabinet ministers and prime ministers are elected. And I think it's a very good thing that we do that because it's a democracy. We want them to be, elected at in some respects. So I think you'll see that he will need to get a seat very quickly if he hasn't already got one by the time the leadership takes place.
Currently, the federal government is prorogued. I looked up the definition of prorogue, and simply it means to discontinue without dissolving parliament. Is that what it actually means? And oh yeah, right now, are all the federal government services suspended? Like, are there any MPs in Ottawa right now?
It's two separate things because
Okay.
the government, which is the executive, it's kind of our cabinet, it's the prime minister, the cabinet, continues to work. The ministries are in operation, the departments are operational, all the services are still there. What has ceased is the sitting of the House of Commons and the committees. So right now, no new laws can be passed. Right now, there's no studies happening, there's no witnesses being called. But quite frankly, Marge, and I know a lot of people have called this out, but this fall was very frustrating for me, for many people, because nothing was really happening. There was a disagreement. Of course, I'm partisan, and I would say it was filibustering on part of the Conservatives. Conservatives of the NDP would say it was a problem with us. Whatever it was, nothing was working. We were not passing any legislation. We were not having any substantial debates. And quite frankly, in my mind, it was a complete waste of money and time. So the fact that it's prorogued, we still have the government negotiating with the United States. We still have all the meetings happening. All the departments are still working. The ministries are working. Government services are working. And basically, a parliament that was not really doing much this fall has been suspended. After the new leadership, after we come back with a new throne speech, we reset a bit. We have some new, supply bills introduced that either we get on a better footing and we can move forward, or we go to an election. Because, like I
Yeah.
say, it was frustrating for everyone, I think.
Prorogation is to end March 24th.
Yes.
So what really happens on March 25th?
Well, actually, on March 24th, we go back. We go back to the House of Commons.
Okay.
All members of Parliament presumably will be there. We will have a new leader. There will be a throne speech. So it's like the beginning of a new session of Parliament. We will go back into the business of the House. Now, a few things can happen. Some things, when we prorogue, are ended. Other things continue. Privilege motions continue. So if the opposition wants to continue to filibuster and do nothing in Parliament, they can do that. They can restart this debate that has been going on for 3 months, which we've heard every argument and every member of Parliament and the Conservatives talk on, repeatedly the same thing. It could be started again and we could waste more time and money. Or we could actually debate the throne speech. We could debate actual legislation that's there around supply bills, and we can move forward. Either way, at some point there will be votes. There will be votes that will be, I'm sure, non-confidence votes or will be confidence votes. And we will see whether there are a majority of parliamentarians that support the new leader, the new government, because it will be a new leader in government at that point. It will still be liberal, but it will be a new leader and a new government with a new direction, or whether they decide that they would rather go to an early election. And we have a set election. It's for October 20th, 2025. So it will be happening in the fall if the House continues to have confidence in the government. But if they don't, we'll go to an early election. Not too long after Doug Ford has triggered his early election, then we'll be into an election.
Okay, so once the election is called, like how much time do we have? Is it a set number of days? It's a variable?
It's yeah, there's a little bit of play there. I think it's like between 35 and 50 March.
Okay.
It's not a huge number, but there is a little bit of discretion there in how long the actual election period is, the campaigns are.
Like I know you and many other federal candidates are already gearing up, you're campaigning. What is different after an election is called?
Well, during the writ period, the writ per se, I am no longer a member of parliament, technically. I mean, we are all candidates. So everyone who's running in Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, or in Richmond Hill South, or wherever it is, we are all candidates for the parties we represent. The office it has bare bones functionality, but basically it's closed. And so for that period, the month or whatever it is, we are in campaign mode. I'm out there knocking on doors or doing whatever I'm as a candidate, not as a member of parliament. Up until then, we can organize, we can do other things. Oh, the other thing I should mention, Marge, though, is there are certain rules that apply when an election is called. So there are spending limits in place. There are certain, we put up signs, there are certain things we're allowed to do. Certain advertising rules change. We can't advertise on certain forums or mediums, and we have to make sure that every time something goes out, it is as a candidate with the having our EDA say this is on behalf of us. So there's different kind of rules that go into place. And like I say, there are limits of spending. Before the writ period of the election is called, there's no limit on spending. And this is something that's very interesting because the Conservatives out fundraise us. They spend a lot of money on fundraising, and they tend to get more money from large corporations and executives, et cetera. They have a lot more money. And so this is what has happened over the last period of time. Before the election is called, they've been doing a lot of advertising, as you've probably seen if you watch any television, where the leader of the opposition is on as a family man and doing this and that for, constantly and sending out a message. So then it's not restricted. It's not until the election is called and we're in that writ period of 35 to 50 days that there are restrictions on how much can be spent by every candidate in a riding.
Okay. Now, I do want to talk a little about the situation with the US. I do find the reports that what comes out in the news rather disconcerting. So you've said there are negotiations happening right now. Now, are the talks like general specific? Like, are they talking about tariffs, car parts, wheat, oil, lumber? Like, what do you know what's the conversations are being had?
Yes, there are numerous conversations, Marge, because it's very hard to really pinpoint what the issues are. There's a lot of different things happening, especially with the new president, in terms of what his agenda is and what he's trying to accomplish. So I think, you see the premiers, you see mayors, you see the federal government, you see everybody out talking to our counterparts or our allies in the United States, as well as members of the administration, to say, hey, let's address the issues and move forward in a way where we are still strong allies. Because really, Canada and the United States, yes, we have differences. Yes, we are different countries, but it really is an incredible partnership in many ways, really unparalleled across the earth, across the world, between two countries. And it's a real shame to let the differences dominate the kinds of benefits we have from being, close allies and sharing this geographic space. So I think that there is a lot going on right now. Specifically, I would say border issues have been something which the new administration has been concerned about. We're trying to be sure that the information is out there, as we can talk about later, but disinformation and misinformation is so prevalent right now that we're trying to correct that and say, we understand you have concerns about drug overdoses, opioid uses, fentanyl in the United States, but less than 1% comes from Canada.
Yeah.
And when you look at our border, very few, I mean, really, in fact, I would say strengthen our border is good because it will address the concerns of the United States, but it's also good for Canada because we get a lot more, let's say, problematic issues coming from the United States into Canada than the other way around. So it's a win-win in some ways, but we have to show that we're responding to the concerns that the administration has. And I think our new Minister for Public Safety, Dave McGuinty, has done a great job on that. Another is just fairness in trade. And there have been some concerns about that, which we are addressing and we have addressed. We renegotiated the NAFTA agreement, NAFTA 2, or CUSMA as we call it. We did a very good job on, and I think it was seen as fair. The US government agreed to it, and I think it was a win-win. But they have other issues now. I think it's more to do, quite frankly, with other countries, but we're party to that agreement. And so this may be a way for them to renegotiate that agreement earlier than we would have otherwise, which wouldn't have been until 2026. So it's really hard to know specifically, Marge, but we are, as I said, reaching out to our allies, trying to underscore the benefits of the free trade between the United States and Canada. And there are certain industries, certain areas. You hear a lot about Florida orange juice or bourbon, Kentucky bourbon, or whatever it is. There are certain areas where it's much more it would be have a much greater impact
Yep.
if there were these kind of tariffs on either side. We don't want a war. We don't want to fight.
Are there being some responses formulated to, Trump's sort of what I refer to as imperialistic rhetoric? It bothers me.
It really bothers me too, Marge, but I think at the end of the day, what I ask myself often with many things that either are brought up to me or I confront is that, as much as I'd like to just sometimes get very angry and yell or come out and strongly on something, I say, that may make me feel good, but what good does it do? And here I always look first in our community. I say, what's the benefit, what's the positive that I can, and what change can actually affect or difference can I make? Or am I just standing on a soapbox for the purpose of standing on a soapbox and maybe appeasing a certain group or getting more votes? I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in what's best for our community, what's best for our country. And I think in this case, we have to look at it, and as indignant as I may be about some of the things that are being said, our government's standing up and yelling and doing whatever. But in the end, is it going to help us? Is it going to help us get to our goal, which is really to protect Canadian jobs, to ensure these tariffs are not put in place? And, there's that saying, don't poke the bear.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have to be a little bit less vocal, perhaps,
Yep.
or a little bit less
Reactive.
reactive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the liberal way, quite frankly, is to say our priority is to protect Canadians, is to protect our communities. To a certain extent, we can swallow our pride, not put ourselves in a poor position to negotiate, never.
Yeah.
You want to be strong enough that it's seen that we will stand up without poking the bear. Quite
Okay.
frankly.
Okay. Okay. I wish us all well. Now, I've been talking to people about what can we do? And the idea has been put out there that we need to avoid buying American products and not visiting the US. So what do you think of that?
I'm of two minds, Marge, because I have this feeling where I want Canada to be more self-sufficient
Yeah.
and more sustainable. And we saw that not just with this new approach from the administration in the United States, but also looking during COVID. I mean, there are certain things when it comes to pharmaceuticals, vaccines, when it comes to food.
Mhm.
Um, when there's certain things where I say, let's invest a bit more. Let's try and build up and be a bit more self-sufficient as a country. But I do believe that free trade benefits the entire world. It makes sense. So, yes, I've always said buy local. And especially for our small businesses, our local businesses in Aurora and Richmond Hill, Oak Ridges, let's support them for many, many reasons. So I would continue to say that. But the reality is that there are some things that are going to come from the United States to Canada and or from other countries, and they're a better product or a better buy, and it makes sense. I like the fact that Canadians may have more pride and may think a little bit more about supporting our businesses. I think it's a good thing, but I don't think we want to go into isolationism either. I don't think it makes sense. And again, um, we want people to buy Canadian products too.
Yeah.
So it's a mutual thing. So yes, and I think the other thing, Marge, I would say is that the one thing that I do think is a really positive thing that we can do is take down the barriers between provinces. So let's trade east to west as
Yeah.
well. We go more north to south. It makes no sense to have these trade
Yeah.
barriers. And although I never thought I'd say thank you to Donald Trump for anything, that, incentivizing the provinces to actually take down these barriers is going to help our economy, our self-sufficiency, and just makes plain good sense.
I'm thinking that you really want us to be paying attention and avoiding fake news.
Mm.
Question where we're hearing things from. Yeah, I think we need more conversation than ingesting sound bites. That's why I like
Absolutely.
podcasts.
Yep.
I actually heard from an American friend that, sound bites cause truth decay. I like that. So, anything, you want to say about that? Any advice? Um,
Yeah, I wish I had a solution, Marge. I think we're doing some things. I find it very disturbing to hear people who want to break down or criticize our Canadian news sources, our local journalism, our Canadian culture, CBC, those things that are important. I look at BBC, I look at NPR, I look at those stations, which, I mean, and I'm not saying they're completely unbiased, Marge. Every
yeah,
reporter, every person has a bias. You can't get away from that. But I think they do a very good job of trying to show different sides of a story, trying to represent our country from coast to coast to coast, trying to represent what Canada is. And I don't want to lose that.
yeah.
So there could be some changes, but let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Okay.
And I think that, that's one thing. The other I would refer to is the report that just came out on foreign interference, which I thought was very interesting, the Hogue report. And one of the conclusions that she drew, or the report drew, was that foreign interference may be a problem. It has not crossed the line where it has caused an election to be other than it would be. And she pointed out the difference between foreign interference and foreign influence, which I thought was very interesting. But the one thing she said is the biggest problem we have is misinformation and disinformation, more than foreign influence or interference. And it's because that is a global problem.
Yeah,
It's not only that countries are trying to influence us, that's happened since time immemorial. It's that they are putting out lies.
yeah,
They're lying. They are putting out falsehoods, and there are these movements that are crossing our borders. And as much as I love the United States, and I lived there in the past, um, quite frankly, I would say one of the biggest sources of foreign influence, let's say, if not interference, and misinformation is coming into Canada from the United States. And I look at X, for example, and I'm appalled.
yeah,
And I look at, some of the other social media platforms, which are now saying we're going to stop fact checking, we're going to stop doing some of these things. I'm thinking, what's going on?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just, it's like a virus, it's like another pandemic. I believe in democracy very much, obviously. But right now, I don't feel like I'm running against another party or person. I feel like I'm running against disinformation and misinformation. And that is really the hardest thing to beat right now. So I'm really hoping that anybody listening to this podcast will share it, that anybody who is concerned about the future of our democracy in our country will try to be sure that um, they share things where people can be informed and actually go beyond the slogans and the social media hype and the kind of viral things that go out there, which
Yeah.
people seem to believe just because they're repeated 50 times they're true.
Yes. So
Repetition doesn't make something true.
the truth decays.
Yes, it's really
Yes.
happening.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you bringing
Again.
that up.
Yeah.
I think we really need to be vigilant on that front.
Okay. No, you have said some amazing things. So I think we should be ending this podcast again. So much great things that you said. But I am going to ask you, I've asked you before, but I'll ask you again. Name one thing that you really like about this community.
Again, there's so many things, Marge, but I will say diversity and inclusion. This the sense of acceptance of like we are such a diverse community, but people really seem to appreciate it and to embrace it.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's really important.
Okay. Okay. That is a good point to end on. And so, yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I think you've given us lots to think about. And I think that's the essence is we need to be thinking about things. So good
Absolutely.
luck with everything. We will keep in touch. And when the writ is dropped, I will be reaching out to candidates with specific questions and doing, comparing candidates' responses to important issues. So we'll keep in
Thank you.
touch. And again, good luck with everything.
Thank you, Marge. And I really appreciate your doing this. Those conversations that we need so much. So
Okay.
keep
Thank
connecting
you.
us.
Thank you for listening. I would very much appreciate you sharing this podcast. Please tune in next week as we continue to explore the community. Consider emailing me at Marge, M-A-R-J, at margeandre.com. I welcome suggestions for podcast guests. Stay well, stay connected.